Juliana, great to see you. And let's continue the conversation about some of the COP28 outcomes here in Dubai. Very pleased to say that Majid Jafar joins us. He's CEO of Crescent, Petroleum. Majid, so good to have you. Welcome into the conversation.
Thank you.
So give me an industry operator's perspective on what has unfolded here so far and what needs to materially be achieved in order to consider this COP a success.
So actually, I think it's already been a huge success. I mean, I'm here from the UAE, and I think the UAE has put an incredible effort in making it. First of all, the largest COP ever. It's 40% bigger than last year's. It's 80% bigger than the year before in terms of attendees. The most inclusive, so we've had not only the government negotiators, but also all industries from the private sector, NGOs, indigenous communities, youth. I mean, there are school groups here today, which is just amazing. But then also the most ambitious ever. So we've already had, from the very first day, our President, His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, announcing the $30 billion for the new Altera fund with BlackRock and Brookfield and all these major investors aiming to get to 250 billion. Very much focusing on climate finance in the developing world, which is where it's most needed. That plus trebling renewable energy, trebling nuclear energy, doubling energy efficiency, and also the announcement from my own industry, the oil and gas decarbonization accelerator, really targeting to bring methane emissions right down by the end of the decade. So I think we've already seen huge successes, and we're only halfway through.
Indeed. And when it comes to this methane reduction pledge, I thought it was really interesting because COP28 has really put methane on the agenda. When it comes to the reaction, though, it's been mixed. Antonio Guterres, of course, over at the UN, says this methane pledge by the giants behind the climate crisis falls short. How do you respond to that?
So first of all, blaming the producers of oil and gas for climate change is like blaming farmers for obesity. It's our societal consumption that is the issue. Now, we will still need oil and gas throughout the transition, and there is no scenario, even the most ambitious scenario, that does not include that. Gas to back up intermittent renewables, and oil makes so much of what the transition will rely upon, from solar panels to wind turbines to the electric cars themselves, from the roads they drive on to the tires to the interiors. We will still need it. So with all respect for that viewpoint, perhaps he should start with the UN itself. Maybe he should have traveled here in a wooden boat with sails, rowing when the wind died down. Maybe he should move the UN staff to upstate New York, to a forest somewhere where they can grow their own food without fertilizers. He has to take away all their smartphones. They can't use email. They can use maybe carrier pigeon for UN communications. I mean, I'm just making the point how much the world still requires oil and gas. We need to produce it cleaner, absolutely, and we can. And the commitments here are a big step in that direction. And we will be using it differently as well. But we will still be needing it. So actually calling for lack of investment in it, we've seen what's happened in the last few years. We've had energy price spikes, more energy poverty in the developing world that the UN is supposed to be about, the Sustainable Development Goals. Climate action is one of the 17. The others seem to be neglected, and the developing world is calling for that. And more burning of coal in places like China and India because gas became too expensive for lack of investment. So we're actually failing on all three legs of the so-called energy trilemma: sustainability, affordability, and availability. We've got to keep that in mind.
I know what you're talking about here is something that the COP28 President, Dr. Sultan, has spoken about, but also other major oil and gas players have been discussing as well. They say they have to be at the table, they have to be part of these negotiations because fossil fuels are still going to be critical in the future, whether or not they are phased out or whether they are phased down. And I want your reaction to what the CEO of ExxonMobil also told us this week. He says COP28 should be focusing on reducing emissions, not necessarily phasing out fossil fuels. But how do you reduce emissions, particularly on the methane side? What's your own pledge and how do you get there?
So as Crescent Petroleum, we've already had a 7-year program bringing down our methane emissions to 0.12%, and then offsetting the remainder with UN-certified carbon offsets, supporting wind power in Mongolia and China to achieve carbon neutrality across our operations 2 years ago, and we've maintained that. So our carbon intensity is 6 kilos per barrel of oil equivalent of CO2, which is actually the lowest in our region. So how we produce it is important, but also the gas we produce in the Middle East by displacing diesel for power generation avoids 5 million tons a year of CO2, which is actually more than by Tesla worldwide. So the role is still important. The phase out, phase down is a bit of a negotiator's terminology, and I'm not part of those negotiations, thankfully. But I do echo Dr. Sultan's message, which I totally ascribe to, which is we need to decarbonize the energy system of today while we in parallel build the energy system of tomorrow. It's not like unplugging a television set and plugging in a new one. It's going to take consistent effort, time, investment, and collaboration of all sectors, and that's what I think this COP is about.
Majid, just before I let you go, one of the other questions we like asking you is to gaze into your crystal ball. Give me the setup for 2024 when it comes to oil and gas pricing. Where is this market going and why?
So I think when it comes to oil, we've actually seen remarkable stability in prices, and I think we will continue to see $80 plus or minus, and we've seen OPEC plus working together through all the geopolitical challenges to sustain that. So their main objective of stability in market pricing, I think, has been achieved. When it comes to natural gas, I am concerned because it does rely more on the private sector than oil is more than national oil companies, and there is insufficient investment. And we've got Europe now scrambling to buy LNG, which is driving up the prices for places like Asia, which is why we're seeing more burning of coal and higher emissions. So I think there does need to be more investment in finance for natural gas, which is the main backup for renewables when the sun isn't shining and the wind isn't blowing.
It's a fascinating conversation. Majid, we'll have to leave it there. We're out of time, but thank you so much for speaking with me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
That is Majid Jafar there, the CEO of Crescent Petroleum, and with that, it is back over to you in the studio.